I am Jennifer Bishop from the Toronto Region Board of Trade, Sponsorship Manager. I want to welcome you all to another great webinar. We've got Brent Breeze from the Partnership Group. He is moderating with Tim Reed from Evra's Place. And then we've got Corey Evans from ATCO Group. Take it away, Brent.
Great, thanks very much, Jennifer. Thanks for having all of us, and thanks to everybody for being on this call. It's the first week of July or second week of July, and a lot of people on holidays. And I know that some of the people that are actually on this call are on holidays, but they wanted to still be participating. So thanks very much, everybody, for being here. Just a couple of housekeeping. I just encourage everybody to have their keep on mute, and please feel free to access on the right hand side there in your Zoom group chat. If you have questions, the format that we're going to use is that I'm going to turn it over and let both Corey and Tim introduce themselves, and then I have a series of questions for them, but rather than the typical the three of us have a chat and then we come to your questions at the end, the format of this will be that I'll ask Tim or Corey a question, and then if you've got questions around that, we'll interact right then and there. So we may not get through the questions I have, but we'll get through the questions hopefully that you have, and we'll go from there. So that's the format. Just remembering that this topic today, and this is the fourth in a series of these COVID ones, that the scenario is that, we're starting to get back to normal, or there's some normalcy, may not be normal, but a new normalcy that might be in the vision that we have, or seeing things happen. I know TIFF is going to be operating in 6-8 weeks from now, things like that. So what's happening? And that's the big question that we're hearing in the marketplace at the Partnership Group, and that is exactly what is next. What do we do? How do we plan? What are the expectations and those sorts of things? So I'm very lucky today to have both Corey and Tim on this call, both extremely great leaders in our industry, and with a wealth of experience and knowledge and background. And what we're going to go down, and that road that we're going to look at, is really looking at and saying, what have we done right over the last 15 or 16 weeks? What do we need to continue to do? What do we need to change? And that awful word, pivot. What do we need to wait for a vaccine to really be in sponsorship and engagement with audiences again? Are there other ways that we can go? So that's kind of where we're going to go today, and I encourage you again to utilize the chat to ask questions and those sorts of things. I know that Jennifer's also going to be tracking on the side, because it's going to be hard for me to both moderate and read the questions and pull them through and all that sort of stuff. So I'd like to turn the floor over to Tim, let him introduce himself and tell you a little bit about Evra's Place, and then we'll go to Corey after that.
Thanks, Brent, for the opportunity. Thanks for everybody for joining. Hopefully you're doing okay wherever you are across Canada. A little bit about Evra's Place. So I work in Regina. We always pound our chest that we're the largest interconnected facility in Canada, which just means we got a whole bunch of big buildings that have really small, narrow halls that connect them. And over 136 years of operations, we've built onto our exhibition grounds to something that really is an interesting combination of pro sport, conference, convention, and trade, as well as recreation. And so we do about 3.7 million visitors a year, which means that this has been an incredibly challenging time for us, because we've seen our revenues go from about $60 million a year, and now we're sitting at about 15% of that. And so the magnitude of COVID-19 in our business has been exceptional. Our site depends heavily on sponsorships and partnerships to make it work. Prior to this, had the opportunity to work kind of in sports and recreation across Canada. Started in the East Coast and made my way across the country, but really have been engaged in everything from community recreation and facility design to youth sport, to AJHL, to WHL, to NHL, to lacrosse, to CFL now. And so I think our scope is quite broad in what we do, and looking forward to having the conversation today.
Thanks, Tim. Corey, floor is all yours.
Excellent. Good day, everyone, and hope everyone is staying safe. For a lot of my colleagues in the sponsorship world, you might remember me from my time with WestJet. I was there for just over 14 years, and then as of March 2nd, I moved to this amazing company, ADCO, which a lot of people don't know, especially in the East, but it really is this amazing company with global reach. We just announced that in partnership with Quanta in the United States, we're going to run the power in Puerto Rico. So we obviously have power, energy through our utilities arm, and then the ADCO, which is the Alberta Trailer Company, provides structures all over the world. And we're actually a group of small companies. We have a Frontac division that does logistics, disaster relief, and just this amazing broad portfolio. And but most people know from the signature trailers, and they are in Ontario. You may recognize them now that we've discussed. But we're really big at ADCO about the community and Alberta. Alberta is our home, and so a lot of our programs run in there. We have partnership with Calgary Stampede, the Edmonton Oilers. Our employee giving program does span to Mexico. Hopefully in Puerto Rico, we'll be able to bring that to our troops there. And then also Australia, which has really been a base of operations for us for, I think, almost 60 years. So fascinating time, and it's been really interesting to start a new job March 2nd, and then a couple weeks later, be dealing with what we've all been dealing with.
Hey, thanks a lot, Corey. Thanks, everybody. So, Tim, I'm going to start out with you. I mean, you discussed around how diversified the property is, hosting a CFL team at Evraz Place, Western League, Western Hockey League. You have a sixplex for local minor hockey and rec hockey. You've got an indoor soccer center. You've got an international trade center. You've got, the equivalent of, it's the exhibition. So that would be equivalent of the Stampede or the CNE or the PNE or the Fredericton Exhibition, all those sorts of things. You've got all these properties. You own a couple of major events that, like Canada's Farm Show, and you've got a conference center. So you've got all these elements. How have you, and as you said, you've lost 85% of the people coming onto your property, or higher probably, and 85% of the revenue. So what is it that you're doing to maintain the relationships? I know that people have their names, like the Affinity Center and Eventplex. You've got Brant Center. How are you managing this during this time, and without people, without activities?
Yeah, well, thanks for the opportunity to respond. I think what I would say is I want to recognize the fact that we've got a great partnerships team. And so I think organizationally, you have to look at partnerships and sponsorships with purpose, and you have to dedicate quality people to it. And we were fortunate that even though we saw a substantive reduction in staff on a temporary basis, we were mindful enough to realize this is an avenue that we needed to retain. I would start by saying you need a plan. And so a lot of us just go into this saying, hey, we're just going to take this day by day. And I don't think we took that approach. We built a very purposeful plan on, what opportunities that we had, how we could reposition our partners, how we could give them opportunity that would find benefit. And then the second element of that, we made a priority to say we want to be the first organization that reaches out to our partners. And so we'd heard a lot in the industry of people saying, you know what, you're still sending us an invoice, but you haven't talked to us about why. And so we made a point of saying, hold back all invoicing, and let's make sure that we share a conversation before we ever talk about the exchange of funds. And I think we came at it from an approach that this is a long game. In any given year, yes, those financial dollars from sponsorships and partnerships are so critical to the bottom line. And frankly, in our business, they may be the highest margin line item that we have. But if you looked at this as simply a 2020 initiative, I think you were grossly mistaken. And what we see with our key naming right partners is, they're 10, 15, 20-year partnerships or longer. And so we had to convince ourselves that let's get our focus off 2020's budget, which is already disastrous. And let's recognize that the total value needed to be maximized. So really, I think our approach was recognizing that 2020 was not the be-all, end-all, that this is a long-term partnership approach. We built a plan to reposition every one of our partners and actually go to them with a recommendation. And we made a point of being first in line. And that first call in many cases came from my office, just to their senior leadership saying, how you doing? You know, let's have a conversation. How can we help? What do you need? And that really just opened the door for that relationship to be often through COVID-19. And I would say one of the points, everybody's looking forward to those conversations in the mornings. So we made ourselves available and accessible. And then we went forward and said, here's the options we'd like to take. And we were very swift for our partners that said, listen, we're hurting. We need those funds returned to us. We made a point of saying, you'll have that money back in your account in 30 days. And so we were very, very responsive. And I think, to the credit of our team, probably 90% of our partners just said, no, you hang on to the funds and let's figure out how we reposition them based on opportunity. So have a plan, be quick, focus on the relationship was the approach we took.
That's terrific, and it's so critical. And Tim, we've been saying that with our clients all through this as well. It's about continuing to build that relationship. And I liked your comment about, 2020. It's part of this year. It could be the whole of this year. It could be into next year. But when you stop to take a look at this, if you take, a year out of your professional career, which is 40 hours a week, for 40 years, 48 weeks a year, this is a small percentage of that career. And the same thing goes. It's a small percentage of the 20-year deal or the 5-year deal or the 15-year experience, even though they're single-year deals, 15-year relationship that you've had with somebody. And I know that we're in that situation where there's a lot of people that the financial situation is critical to them right now. But it's getting through this and looking at the long-term big picture, because it really is about the big picture. Are there anybody that wanted to make a comment or anything on any of that that Tim said and feel about the relationship being so critical and acting responsibly and acting quickly? I don't see anything there. Jennifer, have you seen anything? No? Okay, great. So, hey, Corey, my question for you to start with, I mean, you're very diversified too at ATCO Group. I mean, everything, as you said, about the ATCO trailers, right around to gas and electricity delivery to consumers and commercially. Can you tell me about some of the sponsorships that you continue to do? And I know you've covered a bit of this off, but what are the associated experiences with those events that you've been involved with in the past? And what are those events? How are you managing it now without live spectator opportunities or the opportunity to activate on site and do some of those things? How has that affected ATCO and the event side?
Yeah, thanks, Brent. I think it's I think when COVID first hit, everyone sort of faced it as a short-term problem. I think now we're realizing it's a bit of a longer term. It is something that could lead into next year and maybe even next fall. So for us, number one, the first conversations were around those key charitable partners, our relationships with the First Nations, and do they need help and how are they managing, and is there something that we can do to help right away? And I do think it's really important to then take the time to separate those two groups. And there are some partners who are not-for-profits, but that aren't necessarily charities. And I do think one of the exercises we did was to look at those partnerships that are more on the advertising side. And I know it's a debate in the sponsorship world, is sponsorship a form of advertising or separate? And I do believe it is advertising. It's an important part of the marketing mix. And I think those of us that sort of work in both worlds of advertising and sponsorship, you buy assets and impressions because you want a return on those. And while sometimes we do get a bit romanced by, our term partnership and we want to work with all key partners, there are times too that you're investing, for example, you wouldn't buy a Super Bowl ad and then CBS would call you and say, unfortunately the game's been canceled. We're going to replay last year's game, but you gave us $5 million for your ad. We're going to keep your $5 million, right? So I think it is important to remember that you have purchased something, and you have to look at the math and your scorecarding when it comes to investing in extended properties. So for example, one of our biggest partners is Spruce Meadows. And so we ended up, a lot of the money we would invest typically throughout the year at Spruce Meadows, we won't be investing, but we did find an opportunity to bring an event there through high school graduations that gave kids in Calgary an opportunity to graduate from their cars and have their ceremonies. And it was at another venue as well. And our partnership was in part to make sure that Spruce Meadows could have an event in a time when they're canceling so many other things. So I do think, you want to work for your partners, you want to look for opportunities, but you also want to recognize that you've invested a considerable amount of money. And I know a lot of times, big companies, ATCO's been lucky, we haven't had mass layoffs. And, I came from WestJet, 75% of their employees laid off. But still, 6 figures is a number of employees that you can take and invest back in your company. So it shouldn't just be assumed that all companies have tons of money that we can donate during these times as well. So.
A really good point. Both of you matched that about the relationship and looking to see what you can do. It's interesting. There was a question here from Bim at, I think, Connexus Center, Connexus Art Center in Regina, and his question was, for those sponsors that kept paying, what are their expectations, and are there if there are no events? And I'm going to sort of overview it, then I'll bring it back to both of you. But I think Tim mentioned that it's sitting down and talking to them and working through, and that's what we're doing with our clients right now, is helping them, if they're on the brand side like Corey, helping them to figure out how they can get some value for the money they've left with a sponsor, or plan on leaving, or with a property, or plan on leaving with a property. Or if it's a property, coming up with the assets or the ideas like what you and Spruce Meadows did, Corey, to create an experience, an event that wouldn't have normally happened, but this is something unique and different. So how would either of you answer that question about what are the sponsors' expectations and how do you deliver on them?
Corey, do you want to go first this time?
Sure. I think our expectations is a fair return for value when possible, and an understanding that if that investment opportunity is not there, that's when really, shifting funds or maybe not investing them, because you're not going to get out of the property what you want it to get. I mean, full marks to the Edmonton Oilers in our conversations with them right away. I think much like Tim said, and great job on Tim and his team being first out the door, is, their expectation is that they're not looking for us to not receive value for any of our dollars we've invested with them. And they're coming back with, it's ever changing, but they're coming back with ways that we can get, that same level of investment through TV, through playing games, where, we don't have in audience, in stadium crowds, and our activations that we would normally do can't happen. So those to me are great business discussions around impressions and how we can get our values. And then, we've gone to a number of our partners and said, if our rights fees can help you get through this time, but we can't get the value that we're looking for, how can we work a credit? Can we work towards next year? And, some partners have taken us up on the offer and some partners haven't. So, I mean, I know you want to talk a bit about virtual events and so forth. And I think the solutions have to equal the investment, not just doing something for the sake of doing it. And while, if we're partnering with an event and we're expecting to see, 100,000 people a day at one of our events and interact with them, and that's our recall and our scorecards around that, and we can do a virtual event that may reach a couple hundred, there's an upside there and there's some investment benefit, but it's not exactly the same. And so I just try to approach it from a business standpoint. Friends are friends, partners are partners, and business is business. So how can we, proceed that it's a win-win for each of us?
Jim?
Yeah, and I think I would echo some of those comments. And obviously we're the ones that are reaching out to the ATCOs and saying, hey, listen, how do we keep your money? And how do we make sure that you get value for it? And I would start with the starting point that it is about value for money. It has always been about value for money. And I think that value proposition has changed since the onset of COVID-19. And where traditionally the value was how many impressions, how many eyes on, how many touch points do we get with customers? I actually think, and at least in our marketplace, and frankly, the work that I do globally, it's really about how do we connect with our key clients. And in most cases, that's connecting with our community and be shown as a good steward of humanitarian community benefit, impact-driven outcomes. And so what I would say is we've had a couple of events that have been very unique. One where we chose to run a mini donut drive-through, which might have seemed like the simplest thing in the world, but we made a point of making sure that it was seamless in every way, and that our partners were actually there to be the ones handing out the mini donuts in this drive-through. And the impact that had, I think, on those that came through, as well as our key partners, was substantial. And the response that we got was, how do we do this again? And yeah, it may have only been a touch point with 1,000 people. But the other element that we tried to do is make sure that we had a made for distribution piece afterwards. So we filmed it, we videoed it, and we had a 1.5-minute clip that we pushed out afterwards that had eyes on by 15 or 20,000 people. And so, yes, the experience was only there for 1,000, but after the experience, we were able to say thank you. And so I would say the value proposition, at least in our sense, is different today than perhaps it was a year ago. We did another similar event where we hosted a drive-in Brett Kissel concert. 3 of them actually in one day that sold out about as fast as we could put them on sale. And the response once again was we made a point of partnering with the local charity, so the food bank, who's probably seeing more demand than, well, their demand is 60% higher today than it was a year ago. And so our partners had the benefit of being part of something that really was a feel-good event. Because for those 200 cars that came in the drive-through, it was just genuine joy to be doing something that was safe and felt normal. And we made sure our partners were engaged. Once again, we published a video at the end of it that said thanks to our partners. And we made sure that although that event only lasted 8 hours, that it lived in the community for another 7 or 10 days. And so I think my comment to that is don't ever lose sight of the fact that it's always been about value for money. And yes, you can reposition those funds. And for us, we're doing everything we can to do so. The value proposition might be different today than it was, and very, very much community driven, in my opinion, because we have so many people thinking, what does our home look like 2 years from now? Anytime you can get your partners in front of your key community members, that's beneficial. And I think that value is greater today than it's ever been.
That's great. I think you're both bang on. And when I look at it, I'm looking at some of the people that are on this session, and they're smaller organizations. And I've attended a couple of what would have been luncheon meetings for member association, which you would normally have, 25 or maybe 30 people at it. But when they went virtual with those events, they actually had close to 80 or 90. So they were actually 3 times the size from a sponsor's perspective. But we're not talking big naming rights and big events like Spruce Meadows or those sorts of things. We're talking about smaller events. So I would always say, I think that every single scenario is going to be unique. And this comes back to what you both talked about, and that's about communicating, engaging, and working on the relationship like you are with the Oilers, Corey, and they're going to keep bringing ideas, and we go from there. Somebody had commented, and Corey, I'm going to throw this one at you to start with, and you referenced it a little bit in the example of, expecting 100,000 people at an event and 200 people show up at a virtual. I'm sorry, those don't equate, right? But as Tim pointed, there could be other touch points that can happen. Where do you see virtual happening as part of anything from I'm guessing that ATCO right now, up to March this year, wasn't doing a lot of virtual sponsorship and integration and activations on a virtual side. Are you looking at going there? What do you think the world's going to look like down the road from a virtual perspective? And then Tim, I'm going to ask you the same question after.
Yeah, I think And I think to Tim's point, and he makes a really good one with extending, and then, you certainly don't have to convince me about video content and the value of it, and making sure that that's a way to increase impressions. We have done a couple virtual events, speaking councils, part of our relationships through, the government side and some relationships in the Caribbean. I do think that that's going to be a great discussion for the industry to talk about the value that we equate. And I do think it goes a bit back to the, sponsorship being an important part of the marketing mix. How are companies telling their whole story, and where does sponsorship fit in that, and how can it best be done? So for some virtual events, is that an ad buy? Is that a media buy? Is sponsorship the best way for companies to be investing? And I know for so many places, I know sponsorship and marketing are separate, and we try so hard on the sponsorship side, and the brand side always sort of wave and say, hey, how you doing? But I do think that that's sort of a discussion when it looks at those properties and moving forward. I mean, virtual events in general aren't just because of COVID. You look at the rise of esports and all the amazing advertising that the Fortnite's been doing and incorporating their partners. So I really think what we're going to do is continue to look at our partnerships and be challengers and look for excellent opportunities to do it. And I think to Tim's point earlier, from an evaluation standpoint, you need to start evaluating some of those things, the quantitative stuff a bit more than the qualitative side, because you're not necessarily going to have it, or those metrics aren't established yet in our industry. And so, the goodwill and I would openly say to to our hardworking members, for the high school grad, I probably spent more than I would have to ensure that that event got to a venue we wanted it to be. So the model changed a bit when we look at properties. So I do think it's something that's going to extend and continue. And, the interesting thing is really that timeline. Is virtual the future? I think I'm a firm believer that people want to return to normal, and they want that normalcy, and events will end up sort of getting back there. So it's really, are we bridging with virtual, and are those viable properties for us to reach the audience? A lot of the stuff we do, full disclosure, is B2B. So we really want those hosting opportunities, and we want to talk to our clients. So, virtual may not be as appealing, but there's bound to be an opportunity that is as well.
Tim, before I go to you, Corey mentioned at the beginning of this little clip, he said, that you are a fan of video, and you believe in the power of video, and this is the person that was a major part, if not the mastermind behind the WestJet Santa program, and the impact, though it wasn't a sponsorship, but the impact of what video did, rather than just appealing to those people on one single flight or in one community. It was about something way bigger by taking it viral. So congratulations on that history.
Thanks. I think, Brent, just to say, when you have an event, you get hundreds of people that attend. If you get PR, you reach tens of thousands. And if you do video, you can reach millions. So yeah. I think social and video. So I think we should be doing that anyway, even outside COVID, is just finding ways to extend our partnerships and talk about it, and finding the right time to do it.
And I think you're right. But I think COVID is actually forcing people to understand that and believe it and learn it, because they weren't before. Tim?
Yeah, I would echo that comment. And I mean, Corey probably highlights a great example of the level of leadership in the embrace of digital space. And the lens and the wingspan is much greater than you can ever have at any event. I mean, you can have the biggest football stadium in the world, but you're only going to get 100,000 people in there. You can do more with one great product that circulates on social media than you could ever achieve. But I would echo the comment. I don't believe you'll ever replace the in-person experience. I think the in-person experience will take time to recover, and I don't think it will be immediate. We've found a lot of value in the IMI reports that are shared. And so we've referenced that often to partners that are looking for a place. And You know, the fastest growing trend is this online desire for sports and entertainment, either in a digital format or a television format. People want that back in their lives, and more than anything in the entertainment space, that's what they're comfortable with. I would echo the comments that Corey shared. I think the e-sport and the e-gaming marketplace have been trying to figure this out for a decade. I'm not sure that they have, but there's some exceptional learning lessons if you spend some time researching what they've done. It's really about how do you monetize it. And so anybody that's considering how do you position in a virtual space, I don't think you have to reinvent the wheel, but you certainly do have to learn from those that are doing it often. And I would say that esport world is a great education factor, as well as lots of tools around it. The second piece is when it comes to taking care of your partners, recognizing that they're an avenue to help you tell your story. I do think that storytelling is perhaps more important through COVID than it's ever been, because all of us are sitting home waiting to receive a good story or a bad story for that matter. And we all have time on our hands the way that we haven't before. And so one of the big pushes that we've tried to embrace is let's use every opportunity we can to give a product to our partners that they can circulate and be part of our storytelling network. I mean, our reach is only so far, but when we partner with other great, so when we partner with, the brand equipment team or the affinity team or the cooperators team, our reach goes from 20,000 people that we may have within our framework to 200,000 people. And all of a sudden that provides value for everyone. So I think the virtual space, I don't think we will ever take away from the in-person environment. I do think the days of attending concerts and major events, we're going to wait a fair while before we see those come back. And so for all of us, we better get really good at playing in a virtual space. And I think there's some great examples out there. I don't think you have to reinvent the wheel. Just go steal it from somebody that's doing it well.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. And I agree with Corey's comment about it. It's probably a bridging element. And there's that this virtual world is going to be here for a point in time. And I think it will play a bigger role than it did pre-COVID. I mean, that's just transition more than anything else. And we had recently done some work for a client and did a series of research and interviews around, and this was around conferences and events more than entertainment and events. But part of it will cross over, and that's the messaging is that understand that virtual doesn't duplicate the live experience. It is an experience on its own. You have to look at it differently. You can't just duplicate it. And there are things that cannot be replicated either. The going for a beer with that B2B opportunity after a speaker, or sitting outside and not actually watching that speaker because you ran into somebody that you've been wanting to talk to, and you sit and have a coffee, or you have a private breakfast instead of going to the group breakfast. All of those things, you can't replicate those. You can't put people in little boxes in little rooms and expect that to happen. But we have seen the virtual world deliver something that we haven't been able to deliver, and that's on the sport and entertainment side. I know most pro sports teams are pretty good with getting their players out and meeting with sponsors, clients, and all that sort of stuff. But all of a sudden, in the virtual world, you can get an athlete or you can get an entertainer to actually meet with 30 or 40 people one-on-one over a weekend, because it's half hour, 20 minutes on a virtual experience rather than having to be in a room face-to-face with them on an ongoing basis. So there are pros and cons to that side of it. Tim, I was going to ask you about, part of this, and you may have answered this already, but I wanted to delve into it a little further. Like, you've got your team, they've done a great job. You were, I know, at one point looking at naming rights on the ITC, the International Trade Center. You've got existing partnerships. Some of them are renewals on naming rights coming up. When COVID hit, what happened? Did all of that go away? Did you push that off? And did your team say, hey, listen, we just got a service. We just have to do the relationships with the existing ones. We'll worry about that naming right for something like the International Trade Center down the road, because people probably aren't willing to talk to us about this. Where are you with that?
Yeah, great question. And so I think like many others, we framed COVID in a couple of phases. We had the crisis where it was just panic to make sure things were safe, buildings were shut down, and we managed the disaster at hand. And then we commented the next phase was kind of this COVID maintenance phase. And ironically, I think we took a very different approach. We were fortunate in the fact that we had just proposed the development of about a 120-acre entertainment district to our board of directors who had approved it, and then to city council. And so I want to say our timing, we were very fortunate in the fact that we had a clear plan that was in public domain and had been supported literally 2 weeks before COVID. And so the nice thing with it was we actually saw it as an opportunity. The reality of it is everybody was at home, or everybody was at their office, and nobody was on the road, nobody was on an airplane, nobody was hard to connect with. And so our team actually took the opposite approach. Was this may be the absolute best time to get in front of our key partners because they were around. And the responsiveness by our partners was amazing. And so those key naming right deals that we had, in fact, we've probably never been as successful at securing them as we have been through COVID. Because in many ways, those budget dollars there's two pieces. One is the guy that's got the marketing budget goes, I don't want my budget reduced, so I've got to find a place to deploy this cash. And so they're motivated to do it, and they're available. So we took the opportunity during COVID actually to push harder than ever to get in front of our key contacts because they were available. So to your point, we saw a lot of success with naming rights deals that were up for renewals, or ones that were vacant and needed a property on them. Now, I will say we had to be creative with the deal terms, and we had to make sure that there was flexibility in it, because what we would normally promise, we couldn't. But I will say, I would encourage anybody out there that's thinking about it, don't lose this opportunity, because that VP or that CEO that's going to make those type of decisions isn't on an airplane right now. And they may very well have a window of opportunity in their calendar right now that they won't have in 3 months, or they didn't have 3 months ago. So we've been fortunate in the fact that, and I'm going to come back to it, that we had a very clear plan on where we wanted to go. And because of that, we've been able to secure some very strong partnership and naming rights agreements. But as well with our development, we've been able to secure about 12 major leases on our site, because borrowing is cheap. Construction costs are more aggressive than they've ever been. And so if you are looking to do something that's a multi-year project, this is a good time to do so if you feel that you can weather the storm of COVID.
Great, thanks. I'm going to ask a question here, and I'm going to start with Corey, and then I'll flip it to you, Tim. The question is around amateur sport and around lack of events. So, I mean, Hockey Canada hasn't allowed anybody to go back and play hockey yet. Baseball in most markets is canceled for the summer. You take a look at lacrosse is out, soccer is out. Where do you see sponsorship? And I mean, Tim, you've got facilities that use those rinks. You own those rinks that, minor hockey plays on, and rec hockey and soccer, indoor soccer. And Corey, you've got, that experience and that understanding. How do you see sport and sponsorship rolling out at the amateur level, as opposed to the Jays and the Oilers and the big experiences like international hockey? So.
Yeah, Brent, I think, sport is roaring to get back. And it's funny, in Calgary, Little League kicks off tonight. So they have, they have found a way. But I think, we have got a couple venues that we partner with in Whitehorse and Edmonton, and, heavily dependent on amateur sport. And I do think from that approach, that's one where we know it's going to come back. But as marketers and sponsorship people, we should be looking for opportunities. So is there something that you can do as we transition the kids back, as a partner to be part of that's different? And, the Blue Jays baseball camps, they just did they had to cancel all their camps across the country, and Honda's a big partner of that. And kids could send in their own videos of playing in their backyards, and then have the Blue Jays, give feedback on their positioning and their skills. And so I think Tim said this, the phases of COVID. I think phase one was cancel. Like, no, let's just keep everyone safe, shut down everything, and we'll be good to go. And I think as we move forward now, the phase we're in is let's look for opportunities that other people haven't and get in there and and be active. And you have seen some brands that are active. I think of ATB this week. While it's not amateur sport, their concert series that they're doing around Alberta, because they didn't want to just say no and wait. At some point you got to go again. So I think when it comes to amateur sport, there is that opportunities for brands to be a lever to help them get back and position it and see if there's different ways that you can do it. I mean, we're a company of assets. We have a great program for community events that through our utilities branch that, for tents and stages for festivals, are there opportunities to lend those out to different people? We've just senior homes called us and said, we want people to come visit our residents, but they can't come inside. So we have a series of our tents that are going around to senior homes. So I just think it's those unique opportunities, and it's keeping your ears open and just, when you hear something's happening, is there a way for us to get in there and support our partners, or a net new, because maybe you have canceled some things, but you still want to be involved in your community.
Great. Good ideas. And I like that idea of net new, but also what is happening in the community. And I know, Tim, you do a lot of this too. What's happening in the community and how can we support it? And we wouldn't have done that before COVID, or probably won't do it after, but here's what we can do because we're able to do it. Tim, what about your perspective on amateur sport? And again, because you own those facilities that people are supposed to be in, right?
Yeah, and I mean, we're a really unique enterprise in the fact that we've got a bunch of pro sport, and then we've got a bunch of recreation. And what I always say is the recreation's the traffic driver. We do it more in 1 month of hockey than we do in an entire CFL season in terms of attendance and eyes on. Now, that's me taking my kids 3 times a week to hockey practice, and the tournament that has me in and out of those buildings 148 times in a weekend. But the reality of it is recreational sport is a huge traffic driver. I always say that we spend $1 billion on building an NHL arena to drive 600 to 800,000 visitors a year. Well, you could get that in spending $40 million on recreational arenas to the same visitation. And so I think through the pro sport mix around recreation is we've never had a better opportunity to highlight the value of recreation in terms of a sponsorship possibility. As I look out my window right now, we have 4 arenas that are open. And right now there's a tailgate party going on in the parking lot of our grounds because everybody's dropped their kids off. They're not allowed to go into the buildings. And so what do? Well, right now somebody goes out and gets the coffee, and literally right now there's a tailgate party going on with a bunch of moms and dads waiting for their kids to get off the ice because they're not allowed to go in. And what we've seen around recreational sport is there is an opportunity to be first in line. And so we see soccer returning, we see hockey returning, we see figure skating returning. And what we've been able to do is pivot our sponsors' investment dollars to a welcome back campaign. And so for all of us that run these recreation facilities and all of us that don't have enough budget to do so, all of a sudden we've probably been hit with $60,000, $80,000 worth of new signage, cleaning practices, all those things. Well, to the credit of our Marcom team, what they did is they said, let's bring all of our partners into that. And so when you walk into our arenas today, there's a whole campaign around welcome back. We've missed you. We're going to keep you safe. But it's not just our brand. It's actually all of our partners' brands. And coming back to that sense of perceived value, being part of grassroots hockey or soccer, or frankly, taking care of people's children is probably more important today than it's ever been. And so I think there is an opportunity, wouldn't minimize that. I think as the owner and the operator, however, you have to be exceptionally diligent that nobody gets sick. And so those partners are thrilled to be there today, but our goal is to make sure that there is never a crack in that armor of safety. People are 6 feet apart, we're sanitizing properly. And because of that, we've seen a lot of success. So, to your point, I think recreational sport, the concept of regional tourism is probably going to be a primary driver. You know, I don't know about many of us, but I'm not hopping on a plane to fly to Lord knows where tomorrow. But if you told me to drive to Saskatoon or pop over to Lethbridge, I might just consider doing those things a lot easier than I would hop on an airplane these days. And so I do believe regional tourism will recover quickly. And I think the concept of regional recreational tourism may be more valuable today than it's ever been. And I think we need to capitalize on that.
Terrific. It's and I know that from the sport tourism side, that's huge, and they are looking at how they're going to roll that out. There was another question here that Justin Ralph had, and he's over with the Phrase Management Group. This comes back to the comment I think Tim you had made on esports, and Corey, I think you made some reference to it too. And when we stop to take a look at it, is there an activation that either of you have seen or is a best practice, not necessarily an activation, but a best practice in the esport world that you can transfer that traditional properties could look at? I know that maybe I'll start out on that one, and then I can leave it both of you guys to think. But the one that I've seen that's the biggest advantage that esports has is its players have personality. They're engaged with their audiences, and they're on social, they're doing these things, and it's all about their sponsors and all about their gaming. And so if we can take that to the traditional and start looking at storytelling and interaction, I think that that's probably one of the things that I would truly talk about. Traditional properties can do a lot better in learning from esports. How about you?
Corey, you want to take a stab at that, or I'm happy to go? So I think recognize the fact that esport have already established that people can come together in a virtual space. And so much of our thinking is that we have to go to an arena, we have to go to a stadium, we have to go to a rec center. Well, the reality of it is esport has taught us for a decade that no, we can actually get together in a virtual space. We just have to make that virtual space somewhere that people want to go. And that's, as you said, because of the personalities. It's driven because of the program. And I think it's also driven by the fact that that virtual space is seamless. So one of the learnings that I would say coming from a few events that we've done around the esport environment is you cannot afford to have a technology screw up when you're working in that space. And so if you want to play in a virtual environment, you have to make sure that all the systems, all the technology, all the data, all the things that I truly don't understand are in place so that it doesn't not work. I would use an example that we had, and I'm going to use the example of coming back to this. We did a Saskatchewan night out with Brett Kissel, and he did 3 shows here in Saskatchewan, and we were limited to 200 cars in a parking lot. It was the most bizarre thing that you've ever seen, but truly it was one of the most incredible experiences I've ever been part of. And everybody that went will remember that for the rest of their lives. But to Brett's credit, we worked with him to make sure that we had a YouTube push on that live concert. And so even though there was only 200 people that could attend in person, pushing that to a digital space allowed us to get to 20,000 people. So we couldn't fit 20,000 people in our arenas, but we could access them in a digital space. The other element that we were able to partner with, and this comes back to some of those traditional mechanisms, is we partnered with local radio and provincial radio to make sure that that concert was live on air across the province. And so I would just suggest that, yes, it works in a virtual space, but it has to be meaningful and it has to be professionally done and the quality has to be exceptionally high. But don't lose sight of the fact that everybody is looking for content. And if you can create good content, you can push it a long way right now.
Yeah. Corey.
Yeah, I mean, what I would add to that is, a lot of times in the sponsorship world, when we do a partnership with some of our NSOs and from my time when we partnered with Alpine Canada and, Soccer Canada and Baseball Canada, you always want the grassroots, right? Those are, the elite athletes are great and you get your exposure when you get them through those televised events, but you want access to those hundreds of thousands of participants that they have. I think the virtual space is much like that. I mean, the most viewed concert in the history of the world was Travis Scott on Fortnite. Over 8 million people tuning in. And I openly admit I didn't know who Travis Scott was before the concert, but it was a fun time with the kids. So, I mean, you have this community now of virtual events. So I would say let's not just forget, let's not just look at the pro e-sporters. There's a lot of opportunities in kids and adults and, the whole demographic by the millions, hundreds of millions of people that are playing online now. And, there is an opportunity to get in there and do some partnerships and be the tip of the sword. And, everyone used to have 10 by 10 tents. You'd go to a fairground and every activation was a 10 by 10 tent. And then someone wanted to be better than someone else. And someone wanted to get more eyeballs and more recall. And we've battled it out. Now we've got some amazing activations all over, go to the Calgary Stampede. The activations are half as fun as, some of the attractions. And, I think the virtual spaces, that's the new battleground. Now, is that a sponsorship space? Is that a marketing space? I don't know, but anytime you get millions of people sitting around at the same place, a marketer will be trying to find a way to get there.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. That's so accurate. There's I'm gonna ask you. We're about 20 minutes after the hour, so we've got about 9 or 10 minutes left. What I would like to ask both of you is sort of a two last questions. One being, and I know you don't have crystal balls. I know that you're not soothsayers and you can't see into the future. But from your experience, from what you're doing now, where do you see this going? Like, what do you see? Where do you see sponsorship in Evraz Place? 6 months from now, 12 months from now, 18 months from now. If there's a vaccine, great. What if there is no vaccine? Are you going to have the Canada's Farm Show? Is it going to happen? And I know you might not have that answer today, but where do you see this going? And Corey, on your side, the same sort of question. Where do you see ATCO being a sponsor? Is it going to be a lot of these makeshift ideas and creativity, opportunities that arise as opposed to planned events? Because we don't know if those events are going to happen or not. Either one of you can start.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to jump in there, Brent. I mean, we've got an awesome team at ATCO and across many of our groups, and many of them have their own, functions. So I think we're going to continue to look at those opportunities and look for new grounds and try to be first. I think, there's no crystal ball, but I think there's a couple of examples, certainly not to this extent. So, the NHL had a strike, and what happened? The rise of poker, right, in our country that, even today, I think out indexes popularity than in the United States. Mixed martial arts really took off in Canada. There was a writer's strike in Hollywood, and we saw the rise of, reality TV, this whole new genre. So I think, COVID will come and go, and there'll always be a race back to normalcy, but there will be some things that exist from it. I mean, shame on me because I'm from the airline industry previously, but why would anyone ever fly again when we have Zoom and we can talk to this many people? We'd all have to go to a conference somewhere, Brent. We'd have to go to the Western Sponsorship Conference to see all these people and chat with them one at a time. And, we have an opportunity to do our sessions this way. So I think that, the world is going to shift back to normal, and we're going to have those opportunities. But those who continue to look and continue to challenge are always the most successful in our business anyway. And so I think, that's my advice to others is, as we go back to normal, there will be some things that are never the same, and can we capitalize on it?
Terrific.
Brent, I might comment on the fact that I think it's so important that we as our industry connect and we keep open dialogue and we share information, because I think we are at a time of transformation. And I was having a conversation with my wife who works in education, and the education system is about to go through a level of transformation that it may not have gone through in 100 years. And of course, I was pinging off her as a dad of a 9-year-old, 6-year-old, what's September going to look like? And are you talking about the transformation that's going to happen? And she said, well, are you? And I actually, one of the realities that we need to embrace is there's a transformation coming in the sports and entertainment industry that will be dramatic. And I'm not sure that any of us understand what that looks like. And I'm not even sure that any of us are really talking about the fact that this is going to go from the very most senior levels of sports and entertainment to the most junior. And because of that, I think we need to remain connected and we need to share information. And more than ever, this is about learning from each other. And so I would start there. To your concept around a plan, I think the other element of this is have a plan. You can always be wrong, but if you have that plan on paper, you can pivot. So when you say, hey, what does this look like for you? I can tell you that sponsorship looks like 56% in 2020. It looks like 84% in 2021, and it looks like 111% in 2022. Now, I'm sure we're wrong in those numbers, but I can tell you that we have a plan, and if we're wrong, at least we'll be able to measure against it. And one of the pieces that I would really encourage everybody to consider is, put it on paper and have a plan. And that's something we've pushed for within our organization, and be okay with the fact that it's wrong and monitor it often. The last element I think that we've tried to take around major events and the challenges around when do they open and when do they come back is, so often we want to be first out of the gate. Our language internally has been, let's be the last one to make a mistake. So let's let everybody else go first. And then we'll just sit back and see what happens, because I think this is about public safety and nothing trumps that. And so as much as I want to be back to the fair, or back to a major agricultural event, or back to, watching the riders, beat the stamps, the reality of it is nothing is going to be greater than public safety right now. And we all have to realize that the court of public opinion will weigh heavy on us in the future. And we cannot make decisions that put the public at risk, not for our sponsors, not for our partners, and not for ourselves, because I think reputationally we will never recover from that. And that's the way we've approached it.
Terrific. Thanks very much. Thank you both. Very insightful from both of you. I did have one last question. And Jennifer, we may run a little over here. Just quickly, if you could pull out anything that you've learned in the last, whatever it's been, 16 weeks or so, what would that be that you'd want to share with everybody that's on the call right now? Corey?
All right. Yeah, I think, Brent, one of the things that I think organizations do need to consider is their entire communications plan. And if COVID has taught us anything, we're more than just one aspect of that marketing mix. So we need to have those discussions around messaging and how it impacts, everything, how we're dealing with an organization, how it, how it, oh, are we still there? There we go. How it, impacts all of us. So I think from our standpoint, that's been really important in understanding the corporate message. And I was formerly at WestJet, and right now they're dealing with not refunding, the issue of not social distancing. So if their sponsorship people just went out and tried to communicate their caring aspect during the time of the Calgary Stampede, it's not going to be well received. So it is important to understand all your messaging as an organization and where we fit in from a sponsorship standpoint, and work together with all our partners to make sure we don't have any major gaffes, and then just keep moving, keep it going forward.
Thanks a lot, Corey, and thanks for being able to continue right through that little technical.
That's on my focus. I'm not sure I passed, but I battled.
You passed with flying colors.
You did well.
And Jen, you were like just cool as a cucumber there. Hey, Tim, how about you? What if there's just one? I know that everybody's learned a lot, but if there was one thing that you would want to say that you really learned in the last 16 weeks, what would that be?
I think the importance of communication. I would echo that. Internal and external, this is a time where communication is imperative. And whether that's with your own team dealing with the challenges and the uniqueness of COVID-19 to your external partners. And I would place emphasis on the fact that this is an incredibly emotional
right now.
And I think it's super important that we communicate effectively and that we have humility around what people are going through, because we don't know what's happening in people's lives. It's complicated, and we should be aware that these aren't normal times, and we shouldn't necessarily manage or operate in a normal way of doing things.
Terrific. Thank you both. There used to be in the sales world, it was called ABC, or always be closing, right? That as sponsorship people or any sort of salesperson, you should always be closing. And I think that the ABC now stands for always be communicating. That's the long-term success, not only through COVID, but for the future. So I'd like to thank both of you, Tim and Corey. Thanks both for being on this. Really appreciate it. Jen, thank you, and the Toronto Region Board of Trade for making this all happen. And thank you to the 75 plus people, 80 plus people that were on here on a July day and all part of this. So thanks very much, and we'll keep in touch, and hopefully we'll have something else for you soon.
Thanks so much for the opportunity. Stay safe.
Thanks,
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Bye.